I think too often we think there's 2 or 3 contenders for the national championship. There may only be, but you have lengthened that list a little bit. Good afternoon. Tell us your process and the conclusions that you have come to.
Yeah, I mean, if we really wanted to stick to 3 teams, I think we know the 3 teams with the best odds of playing for the title here at the end. They're the same 3 we've been talking about. But one thing I've always enjoyed doing, and I do it each year for ESPN.com, is look at just how many ifs does it take? If this, if that. How many ifs does it take for you to turn somebody into a national title contender? And while, Alabama only needs a couple, Georgia only needs a couple, it's always kind of informative to look at that and see who else maybe has a little bit of extra advantage compared to the rest of the field.
So we know Alabama, we know Georgia, we know Ohio State. What don't we know?
Well, we don't know for sure that Alabama's, their receiving core has quite what they need. We think we know. We're not completely sure that Georgia obviously needs some more front 7 stars. We think they'll have that. Outside that, there are 4 teams in the playoff, and we just mentioned 3. I have no idea who the 4th team could be there. Clemson has so much offensive improvement to undergo. Texas A&M needs a quarterback. Notre Dame needs a quarterback. It's really kind of an interesting place. It feels predictable because of the top, but just about anybody in the country, it seems like, could be number 4.
And, I mean, when you get beyond that, you've listed a couple of schools. I want to go back to Ohio State for a second, though, because I'm wondering if we're just not missing the obvious competitor to Alabama, because on paper they look unbelievably good.
Yeah. No, they're the defense, the amount of overall experience on both sides of the ball that they return is kind of unheard of for a team that recruits this well and did pretty well last season. They're in the top 25 of my returning production rankings. Now, if we saw them last season, we know that physical teams were able to push them around a little bit. And just because they got a new defensive coordinator doesn't mean that's all going to be fixed. But they were pretty inexperienced, especially a linebacker. And this year kind of seems like if Jim Knowles can just kind of institute a certain level of improvement, the offense is going to take it from there, because the offense is absolutely loaded.
So, Bill, you're beginning the circuit today with us and other shows, and you'll get this question. I'm sure you may have already had it. So, Bill, you've done a deep dive. Who's that one team we are not thinking about? That's a very ESPN-like question. Don't ask me how I know. So who is it?
Yeah, there are the Notre Dames and A&Ms, but that's not a very fun answer. One team I'm looking at that has a really interesting path if they can play really well at the very start is Utah. If they can beat Florida, if Cam Rising really is what we saw last 2 months of last season, their defense should be good. Their offense will be efficient. They have a nice path for the playoffs. That doesn't mean they're going to win the playoffs, but they really could be a team that's just sitting there right in the top 5 or 6 for most of the season if they can get off to a fast start. Part of that depends on what Billy Napier has to offer at Florida. They might actually, if he gets Anthony Richardson going, then they're suddenly a top 5 or 10 team, maybe too. So that's one of the more underrated week 1 games. I think the winner of that one's going to be in a really interesting spot.
Bill, I don't want to sound like a prosecutor here, but I'm going to. I mean, you said Utah could be a national championship contender if they get by Florida, a team that has a first-year coach that fired its coach after losing to everyone down the stretch. I know it's Florida, and we've all been there. But is that game, is it such a fine line between getting out of the swamp alive and then becoming a contender?
Well, I don't know if I'm looking at it like that. What I'm basically trying to say is we don't know what Florida's going to have to offer. Because certain first-year coaches, they make the most of what they inherit, and Billy Napier certainly did that at Louisiana. So if Florida is a top 10 or 15 caliber team, then obviously they're going to give Utah trouble. But maybe they're not, and Utah wins by 17. We'll see. But that one is just Florida has a very high margin for error here. There's a lot of different things that could happen with Florida. So that's kind of why I'm not necessarily counting on them as an easy win there.
So beyond Utah, I mean, Cincinnati was last year's surprise team. Everyone loved them, and they didn't. They went on and ran the table through the regular season. They opened at Arkansas. No, is anyone really taking Cincinnati seriously when you consider? I'm talking about for the national title, right. And considering what they lost and what they have to open up against.
Yeah, that's kind of the tricky part there is whatever they are, like they could be really good again this year. My SP Plus projections still have them kind of borderline top 15, but starting there at Arkansas, that's awfully tricky. Even before you get into a couple of tricky road trips in conference, if they're 1-0, if they can beat Arkansas, Arkansas is another team that they have so much new on defense, we don't quite know what to expect from them. If Cincinnati starts 1-0, then suddenly 13-0 looks pretty good for them. So I think if there's going to be one of those the group of five darlings, they're the most likely. Maybe Houston, but I'd say Cincinnati's the most likely candidate if they get to 1-0.
Bill, I'm working my way back to some of the names we've already heard because I sat there Thursday afternoon in Atlanta next to Jimbo Fisher, and I saw the confidence exuding through his pores. I mean, you wouldn't think this guy is coming off of a really, other than being the #1 team in the country, a pretty disastrous season. Yeah.
I mean, that was Zach Calzada, had basically one awesome game last year, and it happened to be against Alabama. That's not really the way that's supposed to work. But, if they have a quarterback, and that has been, the Jimbo Fisher quarterback of choice for the last 7 years, has had an average total QBR ranking of 45th. They've just been very, by national title standards, they've been very subpar at the quarterback position, aside from last year's Alabama game. And it's all about that. If Max Johnson comes in and thrives, and if Jimbo's really committed to throwing downfield more, because they do kind of get conservative quite a bit, there's potential there. And if they have a quarterback, they really might have everything else. Like, so much turnover on the defensive line, you can't even pretend to worry about that because of all the candidates they have there. It all just comes down to whether they can make big plays when they need to, and that wasn't the case last year.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.